Chapter 1, The Woman No One Chose. The spring social always brought Cedar Hollow out of its winter sulk, and this year the whole town had come pouring onto the church green in its Sunday best, though the dust of the cattle roads still clung to every hem. Paper lanterns hung between the oaks. Fiddle music drifted thin over the murmur of 100 voices. And in the middle of it all, quite forgotten by everyone who mattered, Miss Eleanor Hayes knelt in the grass tying a ribbon in a small girl's hair. "Hold still, Sarah," Eleanor said, threading the blue silk with the patience of 9 years' practice. "You cannot recite Mr. Longfellow with your bow hanging over one eye. The gentleman will think a raccoon dressed you." Little Sarah Colton giggled. "Will you clap the loudest, Miss Hayes?" "I always do. I've the reddest palms in the county to prove it." She finished the knot, turned the child gently by the shoulders, and gave her a small push toward the row of waiting children. "Chins up. Every one of you. You've worked harder than any grown soul here, and you'll show it." She watched the child scamper off, and for a moment something soft crossed her face, the particular tenderness of a woman who has poured 9 years into children she will never call her own. Sarah could not yet read the word *courage when she'd come to Eleanor 2 autumns back, silent and wary, half-starved for a kind word. Now she recited Longfellow on a village green with a blue bow in her hair. It was, Eleanor had decided long ago, enough. It had to be. She rose, brushing the grass from her skirt, a good gray wool, plain but pressed, the best she owned, and pretended not to hear the voices behind the refreshment table. "There she is," came the low, satisfied drawl of Mrs. Prout, who could no more resist a cruelty than a cat could resist a mouse. "Fussing over other women's babies. It's all she'll ever have, poor thing. Past her bloom before she ever bloomed at all." A soft chorus of laughter followed, young and thoughtless. The Ashford girls and their friends, ribbons and ringlets, glancing sideways at Eleanor the way one glances at a cracked cup one means to throw out. "How old do you suppose she is?" one whispered. "Old enough to be finished," Mrs. Prout said comfortably. "A spinster's a spinster. Fit for chalk dust and nothing warmer." Eleanor kept her chin level. She had learned that trick long ago, the art of hearing a thing without letting it show in the face. It was not that the words missed her. They landed, each one small and precise as hail. But she had made a peace years past with the shape of her life. She was 31, plain of feature and sharp of tongue, and she had stopped, somewhere along the way, expecting to be chosen. There was a strange freedom in it. A woman who hoped for nothing could not be robbed. She had come west 9 years ago with a trunk, a teaching certificate, and a wound she never spoke of, and she had built from those poor materials a life that was small but wholly her own. She kept a clean schoolhouse. She was owed nothing and beholden to none. If the town thought her a dried-up thing fit only for chalk dust, well, the town was not entirely wrong, and there was no percentage in arguing with the truth, only in refusing to weep over it where anyone could see. So she smiled at no one in particular and went to check the lemonade. At the center of the green, holding court beneath the largest lantern, Vivian Ashford was radiant. She was the acknowledged beauty of Cedar Hollow, golden, dimpled, and entirely certain of it, and tonight she wore a gown of rose muslin that had cost her father a season's profit. She turned this way, and that so the color caught the light, and she laughed at things that were not funny, because laughing showed her teeth. "He'll come," Vivian was saying to the girls clustered about her. "Mr. Calloway never misses the spring social, and this year, mark me, he'll ask for me. Papa says a man that age is ready to settle. He only wants the right woman to show him." "You're so sure," breathed one of the girls, half envy, half worship. "I'm the only woman in this county worth settling for," Vivian said, and the girls laughed as though this were wit and not merely truth as Vivian understood it. Her mother had told her so since the cradle, and life had thus far given her no cause to doubt the family judgment. Eleanor, ladling lemonade 3 yards distant, said nothing at all. But some dry corner of her heart made a private note that the lemonade was warm, and Vivian's confidence was warmer, and neither would improve for being stirred. Then the music faltered, just for a beat, the way a room falters when its center of gravity shifts, and heads turn toward the road. Wade Calloway had come. He came on foot, having left his horse at the rail, and he came without hurry, which was the manner of everything he did. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, dark-haired, with a face weathered honest by sun and wind and a stillness about him that made louder men seem to be shouting. He wore no fine coat, only clean broadcloth and a good hat he took off at the edge of the green out of respect for the ladies. He was, by common agreement, the most respected rancher in 3 counties, 10,000 acres, the best herd west of the river, and a word so reliable that men in Cedar Hollow settled disputes by asking what Wade Calloway would say. More than that, and the young women knew it to their marrow, he had never once trifled. In 15 years he had turned no girl's head with a promise he did not mean. He did not flirt. He did not dance attendance. When Wade Calloway looked at a thing, folks said, he looked at it plain and whole and made up his mind but once. He had buried a father and built the ranch alone, and if there was a lonesomeness in him, he had never asked the town to cure it. Mothers had paraded daughters past his fence for a decade. He had been unfailingly polite to every one of them, and had chosen not a one. It had become a kind of sport in Cedar Hollow, guessing who might finally be the woman to make Wade Calloway set down his hat and stay. The betting money this spring was all on Vivian Ashford. Now every unmarried woman on the green went taut as a fiddle string. Ringlets were smoothed. Fans came up. Vivian Ashford arranged herself beneath her lantern like a portrait waiting for its frame and turned her best profile to the road. Wade nodded to the men. He shook the Reverend's hand. And then, to the visible confusion of the assembly, he walked, unhurried, direct, straight past the whole shining row of them, past Vivian in her rose muslin with her chin lifted for him, and stopped at the refreshment table where a plain woman in gray wool stood holding a ladle. "Miss Hayes," he said. Eleanor looked up. For a moment she was certain he had mistaken her for someone else or wanted directions to a person of consequence. "Mr. Calloway," she said evenly. "The lemonade's warm, I'm afraid. I'll not pretend otherwise." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't come for the lemonade." He turned his hat once in his hands, the only sign that he was a man doing an unaccustomed thing. "I heard you'd taken a book off the circuit rider, the Emerson." Eleanor blinked. "I did, though I can't imagine how you'd have heard it." "Small town," he said it without apology. "I read it 2 winters back. There's a line in it that a man is a god in ruins." He watched her face. "I've never been sure whether that's a hopeful thing to say of us or a bitter one. I thought you might have an opinion." The green had gone quiet around them. Eleanor was aware of it distantly, the way Vivian's fan had stopped, the way Mrs. Prute's mouth hung slightly open. But she found, to her own surprise, that she cared more about the question than the audience. "It's both," she said. "That's why it's true. He means we're born to something better than we make of ourselves, that the ruin is real, but so was the god. A bitter man reads only the ruin. A hopeful one remembers there was something worth ruining." She set the ladle down. "Most people would rather it were only one or the other. Truth's tidier that way. It's just not as honest." Wade was silent a moment. He was not a man who filled silences to be comfortable. "That's a better answer than I gave myself," he said at last. "I decided it was bitter and put the book down. I think you've the right of it. You needn't agree with me to be polite, Mr. Calloway. I've no illusions I'm worth flattering." "I know that," he said. "It's why I asked you and not somebody else." And there it was plain as fence posts, said in front of God and Mrs. Prute and Vivian Ashford and the whole staring town. He had asked her and not somebody else. He had listened to her answer as though it weighed something, as though she weighed something. Eleanor felt the heat climb her throat and willed it down. "Well," she managed, "you've the rest of the county to disappoint. I'd best let you get to it." That almost smile again. He inclined his head. "Miss Hayes," settled his hat, and moved off toward the men at the paddock rail, and the green let out its held breath in a rush of whispering that swept the lanterns like wind. Eleanor picked the ladle back up. Her hands, she noticed, were not quite steady. Across the grass, Vivian Ashford watched Wade Calloway walk away from her, and her lovely face had gone very still and very cold, and her eyes had narrowed to 2 bright points fixed on the plain woman in gray. Beside her, Mrs. Prute found her voice. "He was only being kind," the old woman said, though she did not sound as though she believed it. "A great man can afford to be kind to a poor spinster." "Yes," Vivian said softly, not taking her eyes from Eleanor. "That must be it." Eleanor told herself the same thing, all the long walk home under the cool spring stars, her shawl pulled tight and the fiddle music fading behind her. It had meant nothing. A rich man being courteous, taking his sport at the beauties' expense, choosing the one woman in the county safe to speak to because no one, least of all Eleanor herself, could imagine he meant a thing by it. It had meant nothing. But at her own dark door, with her hand on the latch, She stood a moment longer than she needed to, looking back the way she'd come. And in the private place she never let anyone see, not even herself, something small and long-buried stirred, a thing she had killed years ago, or thought she had, and would not now give the dignity of a name. She went inside and shut the door on it, and lay a long while in the dark listening to the far-off fiddle, and did not sleep for a very long while. Chapter 2, A Rancher's Question. 3 days after the spring social, Wade Calloway rode into Cedar Hollow on an errand that fooled no one, least of all himself. He had told his foreman he was going in for a length of stovepipe, and he did buy the stovepipe, and he lashed it to his saddle in plain view of the mercantile so that the lie would have a body to stand on. Then he walked past the mercantile, past the bank he half-owned, past the church and the smithy, all the way to the low clapboard schoolhouse at the end of the lane, where a woman he could not stop thinking about was, at that hour, up on a chair with her sleeves pushed back, glaring at a water stain on the ceiling as though she meant to argue it into leaving. He stopped in the open doorway and took his hat off. "Miss Hayes." Eleanor did not fall off the chair, which she counted afterward as a small triumph, but it was a near thing. She came down from it with what dignity she could gather and set her hands to her apron and looked at Wade Calloway standing in her doorway with his hat in his hands and the morning behind him, and she thought, with the clear, cold part of her mind that had kept her upright through 9 years of being overlooked, "Careful now, careful." "Mr. Calloway," she inclined her head, "the children are dismissed for the noon hour if you've come to hear about a nephew. I've no Calloways on my roll." "No nephew," he turned the hat once in his hands. "I came about your roof." "My roof? It's leaking." He nodded up at the brown-ringed stain she had been glaring at. "That one, and I'd guess the one over the far window by the warp in the sill. Cedar shakes likely, gone at the north pitch. A hard rain, and you'll have your primer books swimming." Eleanor folded her arms. "And how exactly does the state of the schoolhouse roof come to be your concern, Mr. Calloway? The last I knew, it belonged to the town, and the town has not sent word that it's grown so tender of my primer books." "The town," said Wade, "let it go 2 winters without a look. I've a man good with shakes and a wagon of them cut and drying. It'd cost me a morning." He said it the way another man might have offered to pass the salt. "I don't like to think of you teaching under a bad roof." There it was again, the thing that had happened at the social, the thing she had lain awake 3 nights refusing to name. He spoke to her as though her comfort were a matter of consequence. As though she were a matter of consequence. It was a dangerous, seductive thing, and Eleanor had learned long ago that the seductive things were exactly the ones a sensible woman kept behind a door. "That's kind," she said, "and I'll thank you to keep your shakes. I'll not have the whole valley saying the spinster teacher can't so much as keep the rain off without a rich man's charity." "It's not charity when it's owed," Wade said. "You keep this town's children dry 6 days a week. Somebody ought to keep you dry the 7th. He almost smiled. "But I'll not force a roof on a woman who doesn't want one. I'd only ask you to think on the primer books." She very nearly laughed. She caught it. "I'll think on the primer books." He put his hat back on and did not leave. She had come west at 23, and there had been a reason, and the reason had a name she did not say aloud anymore. He had been a bank clerk in Ohio with a clean collar and a way of promising things in a low, warm voice, and she had believed every promise because she had been young enough to think that being loved was a thing that simply happened to a girl in the natural course of her life, the way summer came. They had been 3 weeks from the wedding when he married a mill owner's daughter instead, prettier, softer, richer, a girl who had never once corrected his grammar or beaten him at chess. Eleanor had heard of it second-hand, in a parlor, from a woman whose eyes shone with the pleasure of the telling. She had not wept where anyone could see. She had gone up to her room and sat very straight on the edge of her narrow bed until the shaking passed, and then she had packed a trunk, answered an advertisement for a teacher in a cattle town she could not find on the map, and gone west with a vow set in her like a fence post, that she would never again stand at a window waiting for a man to choose her. She would make her own small life, and it would be enough, and she would ask nobody's leave to live it. She would need no one. And 9 years of chalk dust and other women's children had proved the vow sound. She had watched younger, softer girls get chosen and courted and wed while the town settled her firmly on its shelf, past her bloom, fit for the schoolroom and the sickbed and the making of other people's happiness. She had made her peace with the shelf. She had stopped hoping for herself so long ago that she had very nearly forgotten the hope had ever hurt. Which was why Wade Calloway, standing in her doorway declining to leave, was such an unwelcome complication. "You may as well say what you truly came to say," she told him, "and spare us both the stovepipe." Wade looked at her a long moment. Then he did the thing that undid her, which was to tell her the plain truth. "I've been watching you 2 seasons," he said. Eleanor's arms tightened over her apron. "That's an odd confession to make to a woman alone in a schoolhouse." "I'll say it a plainer way, then, so there's no mistaking it for anything low." He set his shoulder to the doorframe, unhurried, the way he did everything. "Last autumn you kept the Prout boy and the 2 Delacroix girls after every day for a month because they couldn't get their letters, and you did it without pay and without telling their folks, so the children wouldn't be shamed. I know because the Delacroix man is my neighbor and he only found out this spring, and he wept telling me, a grown man." He paused. "And this past winter I watched you stand in front of Holly's barns outside the mercantile when he came in drunk and cursing and took a swing at his own girl in the street. You put yourself between a raging drunk twice your size and a child, Miss Hayes, and you did not so much as raise your voice. You told him to go home and sleep it off, and something in the way you said it, he went." Eleanor found she could not speak. "I've known pretty women," Wade went on, quiet. "The valley's full of them, and they've been thrown at me since I first turned a prophet, and there's not a thing wrong with a pretty face. But I've buried a father who married pretty and lived sorry, and I made up my mind young that when I chose, I'd choose spine, and warmth, and a mind that wouldn't bore me across 40 winters." He looked at her steadily. "Those are rare, Miss Hayes, rarer than a fine complexion, and they don't fade. I've been 2 seasons making sure I wasn't fooling myself. I've stopped needing to make sure." "You oughtn't say such things," Eleanor managed. "You'll wake up in a month and want a girl of 18, and I'll have been made a fool of in front of the whole town, and I have a very short supply of foolishness left to spend." "I'm 36 years old," Wade said. "I have not wanted a girl of 18 since I was 19. I'm not a boy, and I'll not court you like one, with sneaking and hints. I'll do it in daylight in front of everybody, so there's nothing for anyone to whisper about but the truth." He straightened off the doorframe. "May I walk you to your house, Miss Hayes? It's noon. The whole lane will see, and I mean it to." She should have said no. She had 100 good reasons, each one a fence post driven deep. But the sun was warm, and the man was honest, and something in her that she had thought long dead turned its face toward the light like a plant in a dark room. "You may walk me," Eleanor said. "Only to the gate, and I make no promises past the gate." "I'd not ask you to," said Wade. "Not yet." They walked the length of the lane in the noon sun, the rancher and the schoolteacher, and Eleanor was aware of every window in Cedar Hollow as a hen is aware of a hawk. Wade shortened his long stride to hers without seeming to and talked of small, ordinary things, the price of beeves, the book she'd mentioned at the social, whether the creek would flood, and she answered him tart and true and found, to her alarm, that she was enjoying herself. He laughed once, a real laugh, at something dry she said about the school board, and 2 women on Mrs. Prout's porch stopped their rocking as though the world had tilted. At her gate he lifted his hat, wished her a good afternoon, and did not overstay, did not linger, did not press, did not do a single thing a woman could reproach him for, and she stood behind her own fence and watched him walk back up the lane with his long, easy stride, and the useless stovepipe still lashed to a saddle somewhere behind him, and she pressed her hand hard against the picket to remind herself where the ground was. A rich man being kind, she told herself, the way she had told herself at the social. But it was harder to believe now, with the warmth of the walk still on her, and that frightened her more than any unkindness the town had ever paid her. Unkindness she knew how to survive. It was hope she had no defense against. Across the street behind lace curtains, Vivian Ashford watched too. She had come to call on Mrs. Prout, and she stood now at that good woman's parlor window with her tea gone cold in her hand and her lovely face gone very still. She had waited 3 days for Wade Calloway to come to his senses and to her door. She had told herself the business at the social was a rich man's whim, a moment's boredom. She had not told herself he would come to town on a false errand and buy stovepipe. He did not need and walk that dried-up chalk-dust spinster home in the broad noon light like she was made of spun glass. "Well," said Mrs. Prout at her elbow, savoring it, "would you look at that?" "I'm looking," Vivian said. Later that afternoon she found Marcus Dean in the shade behind the church, and she did not trouble with pleasantries. "You want her post," Vivian said. "You've made no secret you've a cousin who'd take it, and that a leaner Hayes stands in the way of it." Marcus Dean, who was smiling by habit before he knew what he smiled at, tilted his handsome head. "And you, Miss Ashford, want her out of Wade Calloway's eye." "It seems," he said, "we've a common weed to pull." Vivian looked back across the churchyard, toward the lane where the schoolteacher's gate had lately swung, and something cold and pretty settled over her features. "The chalk-dust spinster," she said softly, "will not have my rancher, see if she does." And in the green shade behind the house of God, the two of them bent their heads together and began, in low and pleasant voices, to plan. Chapter 3, Tongues in the Mercantile. By Monday, the whole of Cedar Hollow had decided what Wade Calloway's walk down Main Street with the schoolteacher had meant. And not one of the towns. Several verdicts allowed for the plain and terrible possibility that the man had simply wanted her company. Alina heard the first of it before she had got both feet through the door of Hobbs' mercantile. She had come in for a paper of pins and a tin of chalk, with exact coin counted into her glove, and she believed, an armor built against every ordinary Monday. She had not armored herself against Mrs. Prout, because no one ever could. "And I said to Hattie, you mark me, there's only 2 ways to read it." Mrs. Prout's voice carried the way it was built to carry, over the flour barrels and around the dry goods shelving, pitched to be overheard and to seem as though it weren't. "Either the poor man's gone soft in his charity, and a rich man will, they get to feeling they owe the Lord something, or else our Miss Hayes is a deal cleverer than she lets on with all her books. A woman that age don't land Wade Calloway by accident. She landed him by design." "By design," breathed Hattie Combs, delighted, who had never in her life had an opinion Mrs. Prout had not first issued her. Alina stood very still by the pins. She could see the two of them through the gap in the shelving, heads together over a bolt of calico neither had the least intention of buying. "9 years she's been at that chalkboard," Mrs. Prout went on, warming, "and never a man to look at her twice, plain as a fence post and twice as stiff. Then all at once the best catch in the county's walking her home in broad day like she's spun of gold. You tell me an old maid don't scheme when she sees her last chance riding by." "My mother always said the quiet ones are the worst," Hattie offered. "Your mother," said Mrs. Prout, "was wise." Alina picked up her paper of pins. Her hand was steady, she made it be steady. She had a great deal of practice at this, at standing in the wreck of what a town thought of her, and giving it nothing to feed on, not a flinch, not a flush, not the smallest twitch of a wounded mouth. It was, she sometimes thought bitterly, the one accomplishment at which she truly excelled. She carried her purchases to the counter and counted out her coin, and old Mr. Hobb, who was not unkind, weighed her goods without meeting her eye. Behind her the 2 voices dropped and rose and dropped, worrying at her name like dogs at a bone. She did not remember the walk home. She remembered only shutting the door of her small, clean rooms behind the schoolhouse and finding that her eyes had filled and spilled without her leave. That was the worst of it, not the words. She had survived a lifetime of the words. It was that for one reckless week she had let herself set them down. She had let a big, quiet man ask her opinion of a book and mean it, had let him fix her leaking roof and walk her home in the sun, and somewhere in that unguarded stretch she had begun, God help her to hope. And a woman who did not hope could not be wounded. She had built her whole piece on that single principle, and Wade Calloway had knocked the leg out from under it, and now she stood in the ruins bleeding from a place she had thought long since scarred shut. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, hard once. "No," she said aloud to the empty room, "better to end it clean. Better to send the man a plain note asking that he not call again. Better to be the one who closed the door than to stand at the window a second time in her life, waiting, until some younger and easier woman drew his eye and he woke, as men woke, and remembered what she was. She had done that once, at 23, with a ring on her hand and a wedding 3 weeks off. She would not do it at 32 before the whole grinning town. She got out her pen and paper. She sat a long while, and the ink dried on the nib, and she did not write a word. Wade heard the talk on Tuesday, because men talked too, in the feed store and the stockyard, only lower and with fewer words, and one of them had said something within his hearing about the schoolmarm and her clever nets, and had then had a very complete change of heart under Wade's flat gray look, and remembered urgent business elsewhere. Wade did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He went home to his ranch and thought about it through the whole of Wednesday, the way he thought about everything, turning it slow, and by Thursday he had arrived at the plainest solution a plain man could find. If the town could not fathom that a man had chosen the schoolteacher on purpose, then the man would have to show them until fathoming was the only thing left to do. So on Sunday, Wade Calloway walked into the Cedar Hollow church, and instead of taking his family pew near the front where the Calloways had sat for 2 generations, he walked the length of the aisle to the plain back bench where Miss Eleanor Hayes sat alone as she sat every Sunday, took off his hat, and sat down beside her. The rustle that went through the congregation was a physical thing, like wind through a wheat field. Eleanor went rigid. "Mr. Calloway," she whispered, "you have a pew." "I do," Wade agreed comfortably, settling his hat on his knee. "It's at the front." "It is. People are looking." "They generally do," said Wade, "at whatever I do. Might as well give them something worth the trouble." And he faced forward and sang the hymns in a low, untroubled rumble and did not once look to see who watched, and by the 3rd verse Eleanor understood that this was precisely the point. He walked her out afterward with her hand on his arm, past Mrs. Prout frozen on the steps with her mouth ajar, past the young beauties clustered like a fistful of ribbons, past Doc Whitmore, who tipped his hat with a small, dry smile that said he, for one, had never thought her a fence post. Wade handed her into his own buggy before the entire departing congregation and drove her to the Widow Farrow's for Sunday dinner, where he had, it developed, already arranged 2 places. It was the most public thing a man could do in Cedar Hollow, short of shouting from the mercantile roof, and everyone understood it perfectly, which was why Vivian Ashford's smile, watching the buggy roll away, did not reach her eyes at all. Vivian understood too well to rage. Rage was for lesser women. She waited a day, dressed with particular care, and contrived to meet Wade Calloway outside the bank on Tuesday with every appearance of sweet, wounded grace. "Wade," she said warmly, as though he had not humiliated her before the whole church by choosing a spinster over the acknowledged belle of the county. "I've been meaning to say I think it's just lovely what you're doing for poor Miss Hayes. It's a kindness the whole town remarks on." "I don't recall doing anything for her," Wade said. "I've been keeping company with her, different thing." Of course it is." Vivian laid a gloved hand briefly on his sleeve and withdrew it, all delicacy. "I only hope she deserves it, that's all. I'd hate for a good man to be taken in." She let a small, troubled frown gather. "You didn't hear about the letters." Wade said nothing, which Vivian took wrongly for encouragement. "Well, I oughtn't repeat it, only they do say she's written the most cutting things in private to a cousin back east. About the children, even calling them slow and low and beneath her, saying she's wasted on such rough clay." Vivian sighed prettily. "I'm sure it isn't true. I just thought, as your friend, you'd want to know what's being said so you're not caught unawares." "I'm obliged," said Wade, in a voice with no warmth in it whatsoever, and touched his hat and left her on the bank steps. But the rumor was already loosed, and rumors did not need Wade Calloway to carry them. By Wednesday, half the mothers in Cedar Hollow had heard that the schoolteacher despised their children and mocked them in letters, and a rumor of that kind, aimed at a woman whose whole livelihood was those children, was far more dangerous than any talk of scheming for a husband. Wade came to the schoolhouse on Thursday evening, after the children had gone, and found Eleanor at her desk with the unwritten note before her and her face composed into the careful blankness he had come to recognize as her armor. "You've heard it," he said, not a question. "That I hold your neighbor's children in contempt and write letters saying so." Her voice was very level. "Yes, I've heard it." She set down her pen. "Mr. Calloway, you should go home. You've been generous, and you've made your point, and you've stood up in church beside me, and I thank you, but there's no sense in a man of your standing wading any deeper into a scandal that will only grow. Let me end it here cleanly before it costs you what it's already costing me. I release you." It was a kindness, and it's done. Wade did not go. He came and stood at the corner of her desk and looked down at her, and when he spoke his voice had dropped low, the way she would come to know it dropped when he meant a thing to the bottom. "Eleanor, look at me." She looked because she could not help it. "I don't give my word twice," Wade said. "I gave it 2 seasons back, not to you didn't know it yet, but to myself, watching you stay past dark with the Miller boy who couldn't read, watching you put yourself between a drunk and a crying child in the road. I decided then. I've been slow about it because I'm a slow man and I wanted to court you honest and not corner you. But I decided. It isn't kindness and it isn't pity and it damn well isn't scandal that scares me off. It's you I want and I don't scare and I don't change my mind." He set one broad hand flat on the desk. "So you can release me all you like. I'm not released. I'll be back Sunday and the Sunday after until this town runs out of breath before I run out of will." Alina sat with her hands folded tight in her lap and felt something she had welded shut 9 years before give the smallest, most dangerous crack, a hairline, a seam of light. She almost believed him. That was the terror of it. She very nearly entirely believed him. "Wade," she said, and got no further because she did not trust her voice with more. "That'll do," he said gently. "That's a start." And he set his hat back on and left her there with the crack in her armor letting in the cold, clean air of hope. He was 3 miles down the ranch road when, in the back room of the mercantile, Marcus Dean leaned across the table toward the 2 eldest men of the school board, folded his soft, clean hands, and let his voice go grave with reluctant duty. "Gentlemen, it grieves me to raise it, but when a schoolmistress's conduct becomes the talk of the whole county, these letters, this business with Calloway, the board has an obligation to the children. I move only that we review Miss Hayes's fitness for the post. Quietly, fairly." He spread his hands, all regret. Surely no honest woman could object to that. And the machinery that would try to grind Alina Hayes out of Cedar Hollow began, with those soft words to turn. Chapter 4, What the Town Believed. The school board met in the back room of the mercantile on a Thursday evening, and by the time Alina Hayes arrived, they had already made up half their minds. She could feel it the moment she stepped through the door, the particular hush of a room that has been talking about you and stops. 4 men sat behind a plank table borrowed from the feed store. Josiah Meacham, who owned the bank, Tom Ritter, whose 3 children she had taught to read, the Reverend Pettibone, soft and troubled, and old Amos Colton, little Sarah's grandfather, who would not meet her eye. Chairs had been set out for spectators, and the spectators had come. Mrs. Prout sat in the front row with her hands folded on her reticule like a woman at a hanging she had personally arranged. Vivian Ashford sat beside her in dove-gray silk, the picture of grave concern. And there at the end of the table, uninvited but somehow entirely at home, stood Marcus Dean. "Miss Hayes," Meacham cleared his throat, "thank you for coming. You'll understand this is only a review, a matter of due care. Certain letters have been brought to our attention." "Letters," Alina said. "Written in your hand." Marcus stepped forward, smooth as poured cream, and laid 3 folded sheets upon the table. "Or so it would appear. I hardly credited it myself, Josiah, when they were passed to me." I said, "Surely not. Surely a woman entrusted with our children would never write of them so unkindly." Alina crossed the room and picked up the topmost sheet. She read it standing in the lamplight, with the whole room watching her face for a crack. The hand was a fair imitation of her own. Not perfect, the R's were wrong, too curled, but fair enough to fool a man who saw her writing only on report cards. The words were vile. Whoever had penned them had made her sneer at the Ritter boys' stammer, mock the Colton child as a slow and grubby thing, call the good families of Cedar Hollow a pen of hogs she was condemned to slop. She set the sheet down. Her hands did not shake, which cost her something. "I did not write this," she said. "It is your hand," said Marcus gently. "It is a copy of my hand, a poor one." She turned the sheet so the lamplight raked across it. "Mr. Ritter, you have had a dozen notes from me about your Tommy. Come and look at how I make my R's, and then look at these." Tom Ritter half rose, uncertain, but Meacham waved him down. "We're none of us handwriting experts, Miss Hayes." "No," Alina agreed. "Nor are you asked to be. You are asked to believe that a woman who has stayed late 9 winters with your slow readers, who sat up 2 nights with the Prout twins through their fever when their own mother would not, that this woman secretly despises the children she has given her life to. Ask yourselves who profits by your believing it." Her eyes went once deliberately to Marcus Dean. He did not so much as blink. "I profit by nothing but the good of this town," he said, "and the welfare of its little ones who deserve, I think we all agree, a teacher whose heart is not in question." A murmur moved through the spectators, and it was not on Alina's side. She heard it and understood it. Mothers had read those words by now, passed hand to hand across kitchen tables, words about their own children, and a mother who has been made afraid does not stop to weigh a hand slant against her fear. She could see it settling over the room like dust, not certainty, worse than certainty. Doubt, the kind that never fully lifts. The deck was stacked, and every card in it was her own reputation turned against her. "Perhaps," said the Reverend wretchedly, "if Miss Hayes were to step down of her own accord only until the matter." The door opened. Wade Calloway did not hurry into a room, and he did not hurry into this one. He took off his hat at the threshold, and the simple courtesy of it, a big man made small in a doorway, turned every head. Vivian sat straighter, Mrs. Pruitt's mouth pinched shut. "Evening," Wade said. "Heard there was a meeting about the schoolteacher. Thought I'd sit in if the board's got no objection." The board had no objection. Josiah Meacham's bank held 2 of Wade Calloway's notes and would very much like to hold a third. There was not a man behind that table who could afford to object to Wade Calloway breathing. He did not sit. He walked to the plank table and he picked up the letters, and he read them through while the room held its breath. Then he set them down and looked, unhurried, from face to face. "Whose hand is this meant to be?" "Miss Hayes's," said Marcus. "Miss Hayes wrote me a letter in the spring," Wade said, "on the matter of a book. I've got it yet. I've read it enough times to know it." He let that sit exactly long enough for the room to hear what he had admitted and to watch Vivian Ashford go white beneath her powder. "This isn't her hand. And it isn't her heart, and every one of you knows it, or ought to, better than a stranger's paper could tell you." "Wade," said Meacham, uneasy, "with respect, a man taken with a woman is not the soundest judge of." "A man taken." Wade turned the phrase over as though inspecting it for flaws, and found it wanting. "I'll tell you what I'm taken with, Josiah. I'm taken with the winter my line camp fell sick, and this town wanted to quarantine my hands out on the flat to die, and it was Miss Hayes carried them broth on foot through the drifts, because it was the Christian thing, and nobody else would. I'm taken with the fact that in 9 years not one child has come out of that schoolhouse unable to read its own Bible. I've watched this woman 2 seasons, and I've never once seen her be less than what she is. I'll stand behind her character before this board, before this town, before God, and I'll ask any man here to weigh my word against a page nobody saw her write." The silence after was a different silence, because his word was the thing. In Cedar Hollow, Wade Calloway's word had settled fence lines and water rights and blood feuds. It had never, within memory, been given lightly, and it had never been broke. When he set it down on the table, it was worth more than the letters, more than Marcus's honeyed grief, more than all of Mrs. Pruitt's certainty, and the room felt the scales tip, felt itself tip with them, and was ashamed to have leaned the other way a moment before. Tom Ritter stood up. "I don't believe she wrote it," he said, to no one in particular, and sat down again, red to the ears. Amos Colton lifted his head at last. "Nor I." Meacham looked at Marcus, and something in his banker's face had gone cold and calculating and no longer friendly. "I think," he said, "the board will require rather more than these papers before it troubles a good teacher again. This review is closed." Marcus Dean inclined his head as though it were nothing, as though he were graciously conceding a hand of cards, but his eyes, when they crossed the room to Vivian's, were not gracious at all. Wade walked her out into the cold. The others had gone ahead, spilling their talk into the dark, and for a moment the boardwalk was empty but the 2 of them and the enormous prairie night, the stars flung hard and bright above the false fronts. "You needn't have done that," Elinor said. Her voice was not quite steady now that there was no one to be steady for. "You've made an enemy of Marcus Dean." "Marcus Dean was my enemy the day he decided you were in his way." Wade set his hat back on. "I only made it plain. They'd have voted me out. I watched them nearly do it." She wrapped her arms about herself. 9 years, Wade, and 1 forged page nearly, a whole life, and it hangs on." She stopped, because her voice had begun to do something she did not permit it to do in company. "On what one man says," he was quiet. That's a thin thing to hang a life on, so let me be the man that says it. Let it be my word over you, Elinor, and then it doesn't hang thin. It hangs on a thing this county's never seen give way." She looked up at him. The lamplight from the mercantile window caught the side of his face. "You're speaking of more than a school board," she said carefully. "I am." Her heart did a foolish, painful thing. She had spent 9 years teaching it not to, and it did it anyway, leapt in her chest like something let off a chain. And because it frightened her more than the board had frightened her, she heard herself say low, "I have wanted Wade. I stopped letting myself want things a long while ago, because wanting them and not getting them is a particular kind of dying, and I did enough of it young." She drew a breath. "But I find, standing here, that I want." She heard the words in her own mouth, and something in her recoiled from the size of them. "No," she said quickly. "No, don't mind me. It's the cold and the fright. I'm not a man like you and a woman like me. It isn't sense, and I won't be the fool who... Elinors, who stands at a window waiting. I swore I'd never again be the woman who... Elinor, he said it the way he'd said things to the board, and it stopped her clean. You've been talking yourself out of good things so long you do it before they're even offered. I'm not going to argue you into believing me tonight. I've got time. I've got the rest of it. He almost smiled. But you'll not talk me out of it either, so we're at a standstill, and I've the patience of the two of us. She laughed unwilling wit. You are an impossible man. So I've been told. She had begun to shiver in earnest, the meeting's heat gone out of her, the night come down hard, and without a word about it, Wade shrugged out of his heavy coat and settled it around her shoulders. It swallowed her. It smelled of horse and cold air and him, and it was warm through with the warmth of his body. And Elinor stood in the middle of the empty boardwalk wearing Wade Calloway's coat and felt, for one unguarded moment, entirely and terrifyingly safe. There, he said, now you're mine to walk home at least that far. He did not see, as he turned her toward the schoolhouse, the two figures standing back in the black mouth of the alley by the feed store. Vivian Ashford watched the schoolteacher walk away wrapped in the coat that should have been draped, by every right of beauty and blood, around her own shoulders, and the last of the girl's jealousy burned off her like dew and left something harder underneath. He defended her, she breathed, before the whole board. He named his word for her, Marcus. Do you understand what that means in this town? We cannot beat her at being liked. We cannot beat her at being good. She turned, and her lovely face in the starlight was quite calm. So we shall have to ruin her past all his defending, somewhere his precious word cannot reach. Beside her in the dark, Marcus Dean smiled and began softly to tell her how. Chapter 5, The Whispered Beginning. Wade came for her before the sun did. Elinor heard the wagon in the blue dark, the soft complaint of harness and the blow of a horse, and she was at the window with her shawl already about her shoulders before she had decided whether she would go. She had told herself, lying awake, that she would send him off with some dry word about the impropriety of a woman being carried across the county at an ungodly hour. She had rehearsed it, and then she had put on her good gray dress in the cold anyway, buttoning it with fingers that would not keep still, and hated herself a little for how much she wanted to see the thing he had asked her to see. He was standing beside the wagon when she came out, his hat in his hand, which no man in Cedar Hollow had ever troubled to do for Elinor Hayes. You'll want your heavier wrap, he said. It's cold on the ridge till the sun's up proper. You might have told me that yesterday, when there was time to fetch one. I might have. Then you'd have had all night to think of reasons not to come. He said it without a smile, but there was something moving behind his eyes that was very near one. Get up, Elinor. I want you to see it while the light's on it. She got up. They drove out past the last fences of the town, while the sky went from black to iron to the first thin gold, and Wade did not fill the silence with talk the way other men did, as though quiet were a thing to be ashamed of. He let it be. Elinor found to her own surprise that she let it be too, her hands folded in her lap and the cold air biting sweet at her face, and somewhere past the second creek she stopped, bracing for the moment he would remember himself and take her home. Then they came up over the shoulder of the last low hill, and the Calloway land opened out beneath them, and Elinor forgot, for a whole long breath, to guard anything at all. It ran to the mountains. That was the first thing, that it simply ran, grass silvered with frost-going gold as the sun found it, fold after fold of it, and the cattle standing dark and steaming in the low places, and a creek stitched bright through the middle of all of it like a seam of light. A good house sat on the rise, plain and square and well kept, smoke already standing straight up from its chimney in the still air. It was not a pretty thing, that house. It was a true one. It looked like its owner. Oh, Elinor said before she could stop the word. 2,000 acres, near enough, Wade said. He had drawn the horse up and let it stand, and he was not looking at the land but at her looking at it. Grandfather took the first of it with a rifle and a bad temper. My father doubled it and drank half the profit. I built the house myself these last years, the barn, the whole of it, alone. It's the finest thing I've ever seen, she said honestly, because it was, and because she had long ago given up the art of saying anything but honest things. It's a lonely thing, Wade said. That's the truth of it that nobody in that town would credit, seeing what I've got. A man can make a kingdom and eat his supper in it every night by himself and call it enough, because he's forgotten there was ever anything else to call it. He turned on the wagon seat to face her full. I didn't bring you out here to show off my grass, Eleanor. I brought you here because I've stood on that porch 2 winters running looking at all of this, and every time I did I thought of you. Of how you'd have some sharp thing to say about it. Of how it'd look with you standing in it. Eleanor's heart was doing something painful and unpermitted. She reached, out of long habit, for the wit that had kept every hurt at arm's length for 9 years. You've a great deal of grass, she said, to be wasting on a schoolteacher's opinion. There it is. Now he did smile, and it changed his hard face entirely. You do that every time. I say a true thing and you hand me back a joke, so I can't get my hands on the soft part of you. He said it kindly. That was the worst of it. Why is that? And Eleanor, sitting in a wagon on the edge of a kingdom with the sun coming up, found that she did not have a joke left. She looked out at the shining land instead of at him, and when she spoke her voice was not the schoolroom voice at all. Because no one has ever wanted the soft part, she said. So I put it somewhere it couldn't be got at, and I have managed very well. She drew a breath. I was engaged once, Wade. You'll have heard, everyone has heard, back east before I came out here. He was a fine-looking man, and I was 22 and plain, and I could not believe my luck, and I was right not to. He met a girl with money and yellow hair, and he wrote me a letter about it. A letter. Her mouth twisted. I have taught myself since to be the last person to expect to be chosen for anything. It is a great deal safer. When you have decided in advance that you are too clever and too plain and too old, there is nothing left for a town to take from you. They can only agree. Eleanor's. So you will forgive me, she went on, faster now, if I cannot quite believe the richest man in the county drove out at dawn to tell me my opinion decorates his grass. Men like you do not choose women like me. It is not cruelty. It is only arithmetic, and I have made my peace with. Stop, he said it low, but it was the voice, the one the whole valley knew, the one that ended things. She stopped. He reached across and took her chin in his hand, not roughly, and turned her face to his, and he held it there so she could not look away into the safe distance. Now you listen to me, Wade said, because I'll only lay it down the once, and then it's said and done between us. His thumb moved once against her jaw. You are the sharpest, straightest, warmest soul in that whole town, and I have watched every one of them look right past you for 9 years like you were furniture, and I have thought every time the fools. The blind, small fools. His voice dropped further, went to something meant for no ears but hers, close and rough and certain. You were never too much, Eleanor. Not too clever, not too old, not too anything. They were too small to hold you, every last one of them. And I am not. The frost was melting off the world all around them, and Eleanor Hayes sat perfectly still, and felt something she had welded shut 9 years ago come quietly open, past mending, past ever closing again. Wade, she managed. I'm not asking you for an answer this morning, he said. I know better than to rush a thing worth having. I only wanted you to have heard it out here where it's true before that town says another word in your ear. You've had a lifetime of small men telling you your worth. I mean you to have one man telling you the size of it every day till you believe him. He let go of her chin. That's all. Now will you come see the house? There's coffee, and I want to know what you'll find wrong with it. She laughed, and it came out wet, and she did not try to hide it from him, which was itself a thing she had not done in front of another person in years. I expect I'll find a great deal wrong with it, she said. I'm counting on it, said Wade, and clicked the horse on down toward the house on the rise. And Eleanor rode down into his kingdom with the sun full up now and warm on her face. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she let herself sit in a good thing without waiting for it to be taken away. The town noticed, it could not help but notice. They had been seen driving out at dawn and driving back at midday, decorous and plain as a deacon, and a thing like that could not happen in Cedar Hollow without being turned over on every porch by supper. But the turning over had changed its flavor, and Eleanor felt it that very week at the mercantile, small as a shift in the wind. Old Tom Barry touched his hat to her, which he had not done in 9 years. And on Thursday, Sarah Colton's mother stopped her in the road, the child on her hip, and said, looking at the mud, that she wanted to thank Miss Hayes. That Sarah had been reading to them of an evening now, whole pages, and it was Miss Hayes' doing, and the family was grateful, and she was sorry, here she colored, for some things she might have said once. It was not much, a hat and a halting word in the road. But Eleanor walked home holding both of them cupped in her chest like coals, because she had spent 9 years being spoken over and around, and to be spoken to kindly twice in a week was a wealth she had forgotten existed. She should have known that a town does not soften all at once, and that some hearts, watching a woman rise, only sharpen. Vivian Ashford watched it all from the window of the dress shop with her lovely face gone very still. She watched the Barry man tip his hat. She watched the Colton woman flush and stammer her gratitude. She watched, most of all, the way Alina Hayes had begun to walk of late, not head down and braced, but level easy like a woman who had somewhere she belonged. Like a woman who had been chosen. "She's winning him," Vivian said to no one to the glass. Behind her, Marcus Dean set down his coffee with a small, precise click. "She's winning all of it," he said. "Him, the school, the town. Give it a month and they'll be building her a statue and handing me my walking papers." He came to stand at the window beside her, and his smooth, handsome face was not smooth at all underneath. Letters didn't stick. The board's gone shy of the whole business, now Calloway's spoken for her in it. We need something they can see, Vivian, with their own eyes. Something no man's word can talk them out of. Vivian's stillness broke at last into a slow and terrible smile. "The Harvest Social," she said softly. "There will be a great many eyes at the Harvest Social." And so it was arranged, in the back of a dress shop, while the object of it walked home warm and unguarded in the autumn sun, that at the social, where all the town would gather, Alina Hayes would be got alone in a place she had no cause to suspect, with a man she had no wish to be near, and that eyes enough to sink her would arrive at the precise wrong moment to see it. Alina knew none of it. She spent that fortnight happier than she had let herself be since she was 22 and foolish, and when the day of the Harvest Social came, she pinned her mother's small brooch at her throat, and thought of the size of herself in Wade Calloway's low, sure voice, and walked out her door toward the lantern light and the fiddles with her chin up and her heart open, straight, unknowing, into the trap that had been laid to close on her before them all. Chapter 6. The Trap at the Harvest Social. The Harvest Social was the brightest night Cedar Hollow gave itself all year, and Alina Hayes came to it wearing hope like a dress she had not quite finished learning how to move in. She had told herself, riding in on the Colton wagon, that she would not. She had spent 9 years perfecting the art of expecting nothing, and it had kept her whole through a great deal. But that morning at the ranch was still on her, the gold coming up over Wade's land, the fence line running clean to the hills, his voice low at her ear saying you were never too much. They were too small, and a woman could not carry a thing like that inside her all day and still keep her chin at its old careful level. So she let herself hope a little, and she came to the social with color in her face that had nothing to do with the cold. The Grange Hall was hung with lantern light and corn shocks, and the smell of cider gone warm on the stove. Fiddles were tuning in the corner. The young people clustered and broke apart and reformed like water, and the matrons ringed the walls with their coffee and their eyes, and Alina moved through it the way she always had, nodding, pleasant, apart. But tonight the apartness felt like a thing she was about to be let out of. Wade would come. He had said he would come, and Wade Calloway's word in this county was as good as a deed filed at the courthouse. Vivian Ashford intercepted her near the cider table, and Alina's guard, which had been drowsing, came half awake. "Miss Hayes," Vivian was radiant in blue, her smile wide and warm and entirely without warmth. "You look almost pretty tonight, whatever's got into you." "Cider and good company, I expect," Alina said. "You're generous to notice." "Oh, I notice everything." Vivian's lashes came down. "Mr. Dean's been asking after you, you know. He's out on the side porch, something about the school board, he said, that he wanted to tell you before the meeting. Bad news best given quiet." She tipped her lovely head toward the door at the hall's end. "I'd not keep him waiting if I were you." He seemed to feel it mattered. Every instinct Alina had spent a hard life sharpening told her to stay in the light and the noise. But the school board were the 3 words fitted precisely to a woman whose whole living, whose whole self, hung on the board's goodwill, and Marcus Dean had been circling that board for weeks. If he knew something, she needed to know it too. "Thank you," Alina said, and hated a little that she meant it. She did not see Vivian's smile widen behind her as she went. The side porch was dark and cold and quiet, cut off from the hall by the closed door, and Marcus Dean was waiting there alone. "Miss Hayes," he came off the rail smiling, all teeth and pomade, hat in his hands like a man at a graveside. "I'm glad you came. I'd hoped we might speak plainly, you and I, before matters got awkward." "Vivian said you'd word from the board." "Did she?" Something flickered across his face there and gone. "Well, in a manner." He took a step nearer than Alina liked, and she gave ground, and he took it back, and she understood all at once, coldly, that the porch was very dark and very far from anyone. "The truth is, Alina, I've watched you throw yourself at Calloway these weeks, and it's pained me. A woman of your years, your sense, chasing a rich man who'll tire of the novelty by spring. It's beneath you, when I could offer you something honest." "You could offer me a great deal of space, Mr. Dean." She turned for the door. "Good evening." His hand closed on her arm. It was not hard at first, only a grip, only enough to turn her, and she wrenched against it, and he held, and his voice dropped to a hurried, ugly murmur. "Just hear me. One word from me to the board, and you keep your post regardless of Calloway, do you see? All I ask," and he was too close now, his other hand coming up, and Alina got her free hand flat against his chest and shoved with everything in her. The door to the hall swung open. Light fell across the porch in a long, yellow bar, and framed in it stood Mrs. Prout, and behind her two of the church women, and behind them a scatter of young men with their necks craned, and Vivian Ashford, who had opened the door. They saw exactly what they had been brought to see, a dark porch. The spinster schoolteacher and Marcus Dean pressed close, her hand upon his chest, his hand upon her arm, her hair come loose at the temple where she'd fought him. They did not see the shove. A shove and an embrace were the same shape in bad light to eyes that came already believing. "Well," breathed Mrs. Prout, and her voice carried like a struck bell into the sudden hush of the hall behind her. "Well, I always said." It went through the grange like fire through dry grass. Alina stood in the terrible light with her heart slamming and understood in the space of a breath that there was no sentence she could speak that would be heard. She saw it in their faces, Marcus stepping smoothly back from her, arranging his own face into wounded surprise. "I never," she came at me, "I tried to be kind." She heard him saying it even as her ears roared. She saw the church women's mouths go round. She saw a girl she had taught to read turn her face away. This was the thing, this was the very thing. Not to be laughed at behind a glove for being unchosen. She had survived that 1,000 nights. But to be chosen, to have let herself be lifted up where the whole town could see her stand at Wade Calloway's side, and then to be flung down into the dirt in front of every soul who had ever whispered she was getting above herself. Chosen, then shamed. It was the one fear she had never dared name, and it had come for her wearing a blue dress and a smiling mouth. She did not weep. She would think later that it was the only thing she had saved out of the wreck. She did not weep, and she did not run. She straightened her sleeve where his hand had been. She put her hair back from her temple. And into the roar of it she said, clearly, to no one and to all of them, "That is not what happened," and knew as she said it how small and useless the truth sounds against a story people have already decided to love. Then the crowd stirred and parted, and Wade came through it. He had just arrived. She could see it, the cold still on his coat, snow in the fold of his hat brim, his eyes going from face to face and finding hers, and then finding Marcus, reading the porch, reading the loosed hair and the ring of avid faces. And she watched them fall on him all at once. The tellers of the tale, Mrs. Prout and Vivian and Marcus himself, their words tripping over one another, caught them, the two of them, out here alone in the dark. She was, "I'm sorry, Calloway, God knows I am, but a man ought to know." Wade said nothing. His face, which she had seen soften at dawn over his own gold land, went still. Not cruel, not anything. Shut, the way a house is shut when the family has gone out of it, the windows dark, the door closed, no telling from the road whether anyone would ever come home. The whole hall held its breath. This was the great man now, the man whose word was law, and every soul in Cedar Hollow leaned in to see him do the thing such men did. Cast the shamed woman off with a look and walk away clean. Alina did not wait to be cast. She crossed to him through the awful quiet, and she did not beg, and she did not grasp his sleeve, and she did not let her voice shake. She stopped before him, and she looked up into that shut face, and she gave him the truth once plainly, the way she gave everything. "He asked me out here on a lie about the board," she said, low and even only for him. "He put his hands on me. I was pushing him off when they opened that door. That is the whole of it, and it is true, and I will not say it twice, not to you, not to anyone. You may believe me, or you may not." And she waited. She gave him the length of one breath. 2. She watched his jaw work and his eyes move over her face, searching, weighing, and she saw him hesitate. She saw Wade Calloway, whose word had never in living memory come slow, stand silent and unsure with the whole town watching, because a man who had staked his good name on hers needed, God help him, one moment to be certain before he burned the world down. But Alina had waited her whole life at windows, and had taught herself the cost of it, and could not tell the difference. Not in that lantern light, not with her heart in ruins, between a man thinking and a man leaving. His silence was the answer she had always known was coming. "I see," she said. It was barely sound. She turned from him, and she walked the length of the Grange hall through the parted, staring crowd with her spine straight and her chin at exactly its old careful level. And she went out into the dark, and no one came after her. She walked home alone under a hard, cold sky prickled with stars, the fiddle music starting up faint and merry behind her as if the world had already moved on, and it had. Behind her in the light, Vivian Ashford lifted a cup of cider to her lips to hide a smile, and found Marcus's eye across the room, and the two of them let themselves have, quietly, the pleasure of a thing done well. Mrs. Prout was already telling it to a fresh circle, 3 words richer than the truth. "I always said." "Didn't I always say?" And Wade Calloway stood alone in the middle of it where Alina had left him, hearing nothing the tellers said, staring at the black doorway she'd gone through with something working behind his shut face that not one of them could read. A man who had wanted to be certain, and had bought his certainty with the one coin he could never get back. Alina reached her small rooms behind the schoolhouse and lit no lamp. She stood in the dark a long moment. Then she pulled the trunk out from under the bed, the single trunk she had brought west 9 years ago, that had carried everything she owned then and would carry it again. And she opened the lid, and she began, steadily, without tears, to fold her life back into it. She had made a vow once, years ago, to need no one. She had broken it for a man with gold land and a low voice, and she had been right the first time. In the morning she would write her resignation, and then she would leave Cedar Hollow, and this time she would not make the mistake of hoping anywhere else. Chapter 7, The Longest Silence. Alina Hayes wrote her resignation by lamplight, and it took her 4 clean sheets to do it, because her hand would not stop trembling and she would not send the school board anything blotted. She owed them nothing now, she told herself, but she owed the paper the dignity she had always given her work. In the end, the letter said only that she found herself unable to continue in her post and wished the children well. She did not defend herself. She had said the truth once at the social, to the one face she had wanted to believe her, and that face had gone still and stayed silent, and she had learned all over again what silence meant. She sealed the letter. She set it against the inkwell. Then she sat a long while in the cold and did not weep, because she had used up her weeping on the walk home in the dark, and there was a hard, clean floor under her now where the grief had drained away, and on that floor she could stand. She had been a fool. That was the plain accounting of it, and Alina had always been able to look plainly at a ledger, even her own. She had let herself hope. 9 years she had kept that door bolted, and Wade Calloway had knocked so patiently, so steadily, that she had drawn the bolt with her own hand, and the moment the town raised its voice against her, he had weighed her worth in the balance and found it wanting. He had said nothing. A man whose word in the county was law, and when her name needed him, he had spent not one word of it. "Well," she said aloud to the empty room, "now you know." She would go to Kansas City. She had an aunt there, or the memory of one. She would find another schoolhouse in another town that did not know her, and she would teach other women's children, and she would not draw the bolt again for any man living. She packed a single trunk. It did not take long. A life spent expecting to be left did not accumulate much. The children came in the morning, because it was a school day, and no one had told them otherwise, and Alina had not the heart to turn them from the door. She meant to teach one last ordinary lesson and let them go home never knowing. But children knew things the way animals knew weather, and by the noon hour the trunk by the door had told them what her calm face would not. "Are you leaving, Miss Hayes?" It was Sarah Colton who asked it, standing up from her bench with her small fists knotted in her pinafore, her chin already crumpling. Alina looked at the child, at all of them, at the 11 upturned faces she had woken to for 9 years, and she found she could not lie to Sarah Colton. "I am," she said gently. "Soon." "Why?" There was no answer for that a child could hold. "Because it's time," Alina said. "Because you've all grown so clever you hardly need me. Sarah Colton, who reads better than any child I've taught." "Me," Sarah whispered. "You, and who counted the rings on the fallen oak, and told the whole class it was the finest house in the county." A watery, wretched laugh. "Me." "You," Alina came around the desk and knelt, which she never did, being a woman who taught standing straight, and she took the child's hands. You remember every good thing I taught you, and you'll have had a teacher. That's how a teacher stays, even after she's gone. Do you understand me?" Sarah did not understand, and flung both arms around Aliner's neck and wept as though her heart had come apart, and the others crowded in, and Aliner held as many of them as her two arms would hold and pressed her face into their hair so they would not see hers. It was the hardest thing she had done in 9 years, and she had faced down a drunk with a bottle in his fist and a school board with a lie in its mouth. This was harder. This was leaving the only thing that had ever chosen her back. When they had gone at last, dragging and sniffling down the road, she stood in the empty schoolhouse and let the silence ring, and she thought, that was worth staying for, and it will have to be the thing I carry. Wade Calloway had not slept. He had spent the night after the social sitting at his own kitchen table with a cold cup in front of him, turning the thing over, and by dawn he had reached the conclusion he should have reached in the first hot moment and hated himself for missing. He knew Aliner Hayes. He had watched her 2 full seasons, watched her stay late with the slow readers, watched her face down a cursing drunk to shield a child, watched her answer a rich man's questions without once bending toward his money. That woman had not crept off to solicit Marcus Dean in a side room at a harvest social. The notion was not merely unlikely, it was impossible, the way it was impossible for water to run uphill. He had stayed silent that night because he was a careful man and he had wanted, God help him, to be sure before he tore the town in half. And his silence had put a look on Aliner's face he would carry to his grave. So he did what he should have done instead of standing mute. He went and got the truth. He started with the witnesses. There had been 3 who happened upon the scene, and Wade found them one at a time and asked them plain questions in his plain voice, and he listened to how their stories fit. They did not fit. One had Aliner's shawl fallen from her shoulders, another swore she'd been fully wrapped against the cold. One placed the lamp lit, another guttered. Rehearsed men remember the script and forget the world, and these men had been given a script. The youngest of them was the Ashford's hired boy, Tom Rourke, 17 and sick with it. Wade found him mucking the Ashford stable and stood in the doorway with the morning light behind him and said nothing at all for a moment, which was worse for the boy than shouting. "You didn't see what you told the town you saw?" Wade said at last. Not a question. The boy's hands went white on the fork. "Mr. Calloway, I'll ask you one time, Tom, and I'll know if you lie, and so will you every day after. Who told you what to say?" The boy broke like ice on a pond. It came out of him in a rush, Miss Vivian and Mr. Dean with her. How Dean wanted the schoolhouse post for his cousin, and Miss Vivian wanted the teacher gone from Wade's arm. How they'd staged it, the empty room, the timed arrival, the shawl pulled loose by Dean's own hand while Aliner recoiled from him. How they'd paid and coached and promised. Wade listened to the whole of it without moving. When the boy finished, gray-faced, Wade said only, "You'll tell that again, to the whole town when I ask it, and you'll be a better man for the telling than you were for the lying." Then he was already moving for his horse. Vivian Ashford learned that Wade Calloway had been asking questions before noon, because Cedar Hollow told itself everything, and she understood in one cold instant that the ground had shifted under her. She had not planned for Wade to doubt the tale. Men believed the worst of a plain woman so easily. She had built the whole scheme on it. So she did the only thing left to her, which was to reach Wade before the truth did, and pour one last poison in the wound. She met him on the road as he rode in, and she made her face soft and sorrowing and stopped his horse with a hand on the bridle. "Wade, oh, Wade, I've been so afraid for you. I know you've been asking, and I understand, truly, a man wants to hope, but there are things a lady shouldn't have to be the one to tell you. She's leaving Wade this very day. Doesn't that tell you everything? An innocent woman stays and fights. A guilty one runs before the truth catches her up. She's running, Wade, let her go, you'll thank." "Vivian," Wade did not raise his voice. He looked down at her from the saddle for a long moment, and whatever she saw in his face made her hand slip from the bridle of its own accord. "I spoke to Tom Rourke this morning." The blood went out of her face all at once. "You'd best go home," Wade said, quite gently, which was the most frightening thing he could have said, "and think hard on what your name is going to be worth in this county by week's end." Then he touched his heels to the horse and left her standing in the road and did not look back. "She's leaving this very day." He put the horse to a run. But Cedar Hollow lay 4 miles off, and the sky to the north had gone the color of a bruise. Wade knew that color. Every man who ran cattle in that country knew it and feared it, the early hard winter that came down off the ridge with no mercy and no warning, weeks before its season. The wind hit him broadside before he'd made 2 miles, and then the snow came, not falling but flung, a white wall roaring down the valley and swallowing the road ahead. His horse balked and staggered. He forced it on 100 yards more and could not see the animal's own ears for the whiteout, and he knew, with the flat, furious clarity of a man watching a thing be taken from him, that he was not going to reach her tonight. No horse could cross open country blind in this. He would kill the animal and himself both and never get there. He turned for the nearest shelter with the word he had not spoken tearing at him worse than the wind. He had found the truth and could not carry it to her. She would leave believing he had cast her off, and the storm had closed the road between them like a door slammed shut. "Eleanor," he said into the howling dark, and the storm took that word too, the way it had taken every word he'd been too slow to say. At the schoolhouse, Eleanor had stayed late. She had told herself it was to bank the stove and leave the room decent for whoever came after her. But the truth was she could not yet make herself walk out the door for the last time. And so she moved slowly among the empty benches while the wind rose to a scream against the glass and the light died early and hard. The pounding on the door when it came was not the wind. She opened it to a wall of snow and 2 figures half buried in it. The Colton parents, wild-eyed, the mother past speech, the father shouting to be heard over the roar. "Miss Hayes, is she here? Tell me she's here." Who? Eleanor's heart had already gone cold ahead of her mind. "Mr. Colton, who?" "Sarah. She heard you were leaving, she took it hard, wouldn't stop crying, and now she's gone, her coat's gone. She walked out toward the hills before the storm closed in and we can't." His voice cracked to nothing. "We can't find her. Nobody can go up in this. My girl's out there, Miss Hayes. My girl's out there in the dark." The wind howled through the open door and put out the lamp, and in the sudden roaring blackness Eleanor Hayes stopped being the woman packing a trunk to run, and became something else entirely. She knew exactly where the child would go. Chapter 8, The Dark of Winter. The schoolhouse filled with men who did not know what to do. They came stamping in out of the first true dark of the storm, a dozen of them and then a dozen more, snow melting off their shoulders and pooling on the floor Eleanor had swept that afternoon in another life, and they stood among the little desks that were far too small for them, and they talked in the loud, useless way of frightened people. Sarah Colton had walked out toward the hills before the light failed. That much was known. Her mother had turned from the wash for one moment, and the girl had been gone, and now the mountain had her and the mountain had a blizzard on it, and the men filled the schoolhouse and could not think what to do. "No man could hold a lantern out there," said Hollies from the livery, and he was not a coward, and that was what made it terrible. "You'd not see your own hand. You'd walk off the cut and not know till you were falling." "We wait for it to slacken," someone else said. "It'll slacken by dawn." "By dawn," said Doc Whitmore quietly, and did not finish it, because every soul in the room could finish it. By dawn a child of 7 would be a small, stiff shape under the snow, and they would find her in the spring thaw when the drifts drew back, and they would carry that to their graves. Eleanor stood at the cold stove with her hands folded hard against her apron, so that no one would see them shake, and she listened to the men decide, in their reasonable and grieving voices, that nothing could be done. She had listened to this town her whole life. She knew the sound of it settling into what was easiest, and calling it wisdom. "The hollow oak," she said. She did not say it loudly. She had never had to be loud to make a room of children hear her. The men turned. "On the far side of the cut," Eleanor said. "The great split oak with the fallen limb. Last autumn I took the school up to count the rings of it, a lesson on the years a tree carries. Sarah Colton stood inside the split of the trunk and told the whole class it was the finest house in the county, and that she should live in it when she was grown." Her voice did not break, though she felt it try. "She's frightened and she's cold and she's 7 years old, and a frightened child runs to the place she has decided is safe. She's gone to her house. She's at the oak or she's on the path to it. I would stake my life on it." A silence, and then Hollies, gently, as one speaks to a woman who does not understand. "Miss Hayes, even if you've the right of it, no man can climb the cut in this." "Then it is fortunate," Eleanor said, "that I am not a man." She was already reaching for her coat. Wade Calloway was 4 miles out and losing the road. He had turned for town the moment the wind changed, before the first flake fell, because a lifetime of reading the sky had told him what was coming. and because a smaller, newer voice had told him that a leaner haze meant to be on the morning stage and out of his life for good, and he had made up his mind she would not go. He had come to say the thing he should have said at the social and swallowed like a fool. He had rehearsed it against the cold. He had it word for word. He had not counted on the mountain. The storm came down the valley like the closing of a great door, and the road went from ruts to a white nothing between one furlong and the next, and the good horse under him began to balk and shudder and refuse the wind. Wade dismounted and led it. He put his shoulder into the dark and led it, one boot found and set before the other, the reins wrapped twice around his fist, and he counted fence posts he could no longer see and prayed to a God he did not much trouble to a schedule of ordinary things. The bend by the Prather place, the bridge, the first outbuildings that told him he was still, by grace, on the road to her. He thought of her face at the harvest social. He had carried it 3 days like a stone in his boot, the way she had looked at his silence and understood it wrongly completely, as the moment the great Wade Calloway measured her worth against a lie and found her wanting. She had not wept. That was the worst of it. She had lifted her chin the way she did and told him the truth once plainly, and turned and walked home alone in the dark, expecting nothing, because a lifetime had taught her to expect nothing, and he had let her go into that dark believing he was one more man who would not choose her. He had spent the 3 days since tearing the lie apart thread by thread. He had the whole of it now, Vivian and Marcus and the man they'd paid, and it burned in him like a coal. But the knowing was no good to her 4 miles off with a mountain between them. He bent his head and drove into the wind. "Hold on," he said to the horse, to himself, to a woman who could not hear him. "Hold on, I'm coming." The cold on the mountain was not like cold Eleanor had known. She had thought she understood cold. She had grown up back east in drafty rooms, had crossed the plains in a wagon with frost on her blanket at dawn. That was a stern acquaintance. This was murder. The wind came off the ridge in long, screaming sheets and drove the snow flat and hard as sand, and it found every seam of her coat and reached in with fingers, and inside a quarter hour she had stopped being able to feel her face. She climbed the cut on her hands and knees where she had to, calling the child's name into a wind that took the name out of her mouth and flung it away unheard. She understood with the strange clarity the cold was giving her, most likely going to die on this mountain. The thought did not frighten her the way it should have. She examined it in the cold, clear part of her mind that had not yet surrendered, and found it curiously familiar. She had been stripped of things before. She had been stripped of the fiancé who jilted her, of the hope she'd carried west, of the good name the town had spent a season devouring, of Wade Calloway's silence in a crowded room. She had been called too old and too plain and too clever and too much and not enough, and she had learned to stand in the ruin of each stripping and go on. This was only the last of it. The mountain would take her reputation's ashes and her safety, and the foolish, unkillable hope she had let Wade Calloway raise in her, and it would take her too, and there would be, at the very end, nothing left of a leaner haze that anyone had wanted. Except that there might be a child. That was the thing that moved her when nothing else could have. Not courage. She would have said later that it was never courage. It was only that a child was cold on this mountain, and a leaner haze had spent 9 years being the one who stayed late with the ones the world found slow, the one who faced down the drunk cursing a little boy, the one who came when no one else would come because she knew in her bones what it was to have no one come. "I'm coming," she said to the wind, to the dark, to a child who could not hear her. Her voice was already going. "Sarah, I'm coming, child, hold on." She climbed. Wade came into Cedar Hollow near broke, the horse near foundered, and found the town lit up and terrified. They were at the Colton place, most of them, and they told it to him in a rush over one another, the girl gone to the mountain, the men unable to climb, the storm, the dark, and Wade stood in the doorway with the snow sliding off him in sheets, and felt the fear close cold around his heart. And then a man said the rest of it, said it the way you'd report a madness, half awe and half horror. The schoolteacher's gone up after her. Miss Hayes said she knew where the child run. We told her Calloway, we told her no man could, and she said she wasn't a man, and she walked out into it. Better than an hour passed. There's no calling her back. Something in Wade's chest broke and rebuilt itself in the same instant, into something harder than he had ever been. Terror that she was on that mountain in this, and under the terror rising, a pride so fierce it was nearly grief, that of all the souls in this valley, of all the men who had stood in a warm room and reasoned themselves into doing nothing, it was the woman they had called useless, the dried-up spinster fit only for chalk dust, who had gone out alone into the killing dark to bring a child home. Of course she had, of course it was her. "Which way?" Wade said, and his voice had gone flat and quiet, the voice that had never in his life been argued down. "Which way did she go up?" Elinor found the oak an hour into the dark, or a lifetime, she could no longer have said which. She found it by falling against it, the great split trunk rising suddenly out of the white nothing where her groping hand had expected only more storm. And she found the child in the hollow of it, wedged into her finest house in the county, curled small and still. And for one stopped heartbeat, Elinor thought she had come too late, and that the mountain had won everything after all. Then Sarah stirred, and made a thin thread of sound, and Elinor was weeping without feeling the tears. "There now," she rasped, dropping to her knees, gathering the small frozen body in. "There now, I have you, I'm here." She dragged her own coat open and pulled the child in against her breast, inside it, skinned to the last of her own failing warmth, and wrapped the wool around them both. "You needn't cry, you needn't do a single thing, only stay with me. Stay awake for me, that's my brave girl." The wind found them even in the split of the oak. It pinned them there. She could not carry the child down, she could barely kneel. Her strength was going out of her the way water goes out of cupped hands, steady and unstoppable, and she knew in the clear cold part of her that had not lied to her yet, that she had not the strength to rise, and that no one was coming. No one had ever come for Elinor Hayes. She had learned young not to stand at windows waiting, and if this was the shape her life ended in the dark, at a hollow tree, a child kept breathing by the last warmth she had to give, then she found she could bear it. She had done one good thing. That would have to be enough. She bent her cracked lips to the child's hair and kept talking, because a voice was warmth of a kind, because a child ought not to go alone into that last cold. "Hush," Elinor whispered, as the strength went out of her arms and her eyes grew unbearably heavy and the storm screamed down the mountain to take them. "Hush now, I've got you. I've got you." Chapter 9, The Claim in the Storm. The men had told Wade Calloway he would die on that mountain, and Wade had told them, in the flat voice that had settled 100 quarrels and never once been argued down, that he would rather die going up than live having stayed below. Then he had taken the good lantern and a coil of rope and his heaviest coat, and walked out of the lit doorway of the Colton place into a dark that swallowed him whole before he'd gone 10 paces. The storm was a living thing. It came off the ridge in long, screaming sheets that drove the snow sideways, and it did not care for lanterns or names or the fear of grown men. Wade held the light low against his chest, where the wind couldn't reach in and kill it, and leaned into the slope and climbed. He was not tracking her by sign. The snow had taken it hours ago, filling in the shape of her the moment she made it. He was tracking her by knowing her. Elinor Hayes would not have wandered. She would have set her jaw and asked herself where a frightened child would run, and she would have known the answer because she had put it there herself, in a lesson, on some warm afternoon that felt now like another life. The hollow oak on the far side of the cut, where the schoolchildren had once counted the rings of a fallen limb, and Sarah Colton had declared it the finest house in the county. So Wade climbed toward the finest house in the county, and every dozen steps he stopped, and he cupped his hand to his mouth, and he threw her name into the wind. "Elinor." The storm ate it. He climbed and called, and the storm ate it, and he climbed and called again. She had stopped feeling her feet a long while back. That had frightened her at first. Now it was only a fact, filed away in the cold, clear part of her mind that had not yet surrendered. Elinor sat with her back against the great split trunk of the oak, holding Sarah Colton against her breast inside the shelter of her opened coat, and she talked. She talked because the child had stopped crying, and a child who stopped crying in cold like this was a child slipping somewhere Elinor could not follow. So she talked. She told Sarah about the rings of the fallen limb, how each one was a year the tree had lived, wet years fat and dry years thin, so that a tree carried its whole life written inside it where no one could see until the end. She told her about the spring which was coming, which was always coming even when a body could not believe it. Her voice had gone to a rasp. She kept it going anyway. "You keep your face right here," she murmured. "In against me, that's it. You needn't talk, you've only to breathe, and I'll do the rest." She did not let herself think the true thing, which was that no one was coming. She had made her peace with that some time ago, in the same practical way she had once made her peace with never being chosen. No one had ever come for Elinor Hayes. She had learned young not to stand at windows waiting, And if this was where that life ended in the dark, with a child kept warm by the last of her, then she found to her mild surprise that she did not regret its shape. She had done one good thing. The child was still breathing. That was enough. It would have to be enough. She was so certain no one was coming that when she first heard her name, she believed she had imagined it. The Leaners. She went still. The wind screamed and fell, and in the falling. Leaners. Not imagined. Below her and to the left, a smear of gold light swinging in the black. Something broke open in her chest that she had spent 9 years welding shut. She got her frozen hand up against the trunk, and she dragged in a breath that tore. And she called back with everything she had left, which was almost nothing, which was a cracked thread of sound. Here, we're here. The light stopped, swung, came on. Keep talking, the dark roared at her, and it was his voice, it was Wade, it was impossibly Wade. Keep talking, I'll come to your voice, don't you stop. We're at the oak, she called, weeping now, the tears freezing on her face, and she did not care. The hollow oak, Wade, we're here, hurry. And then the light was on them, blinding, and behind it his face, snow-caked to the brows, and she had never seen anything she wanted so much to look at. He did not waste a breath on the marvel of having found them. That was Wade all over. She would think of it later, how he simply moved. He set the lantern in the crook of the roots where the wind couldn't take it, and he knelt in the snow and peeled back her stiff coat to see the child, and his mouth went hard when he saw how blue Sarah's lips had gone. She's breathing, Alina rasped. She stopped crying as that. She's alive. He said it like a verdict, final, allowing no argument, and Alina felt her terror ease a fraction simply because Wade Calloway had declared it so. There's a line shack, 1/4 mile down the cut out of the wind. You hear me, Alina. We're all 3 walking off this mountain. I can't feel my feet. Then I'll be your feet. He said it plainly, no gentleness wasted, and he gathered the child into one arm against his own chest, inside his own coat, and he got the other arm under Alina and hauled her up against him, and he took her weight as though she weighed nothing, as though she had not spent her whole life being told she was too much of every wrong thing and not enough of any right one. They went down the cut into the teeth of it, Wade breaking the wind with his body, Alina's face pressed to the wet wool over his heart, the child between them. She stopped knowing how long. She knew the slam of a door, the sudden holy absence of the wind, the strike of a match, and then a fire climbing in a rusted stove, throwing orange across a rough plank room, warmth like pain, warmth that made her cry out as the feeling came screaming back into her hands. Wade laid the child on the cot nearest the stove, wrapped her in his own dry coat, and rubbed her small hands between his big ones, steady, unhurried, until color crept back and Sarah stirred and whimpered a live and ordinary and blessed sound, and turned her face toward the fire. Only then did he turn to Alina. She was shaking so hard she could not sit upright. He knelt in front of her and took both her ruined hands and folded them inside his, and he bent his snow-wet head close to hers, close enough that the roar of the stove could not reach between them, and he spoke low, only for her. I know what they said you did at the social, he said. I knew it was a lie before I rode in. I found the man they paid. I've had the whole of it, every rotten thread, these 3 days. His hands tightened over hers. I said nothing that night because I was a fool who wanted to be certain before I burned the world down for you. I've hated myself every hour since for the look on your face when I stayed quiet. Alina, look at me. She lifted her eyes. His were fierce and wet and utterly without doubt. I was never leaving, he said. Not that night. Not any night, you hear me. Wade, you're mine now, Alina. The words came out of him not loud, not soft, but bedrock, the same voice that had turned a mountain of frightened men, the voice whose word in this county was law. My name over you, my roof, my land, my life, all of it over you. Let them talk, let them try to touch you. There isn't a soul in Cedar Hollow, nor in this world, that gets past my name to lay a hand or a word on you again. You've stood alone your whole life. You'll not do it another day. She had waited 32 years to be chosen, and had taught herself never to wait at all. And here, in a line shack that stank of rust and wood smoke, with a saved child breathing at the stove and the storm shrieking impotently at the door, the thing she had stopped hoping for came and knelt in front of her and put its whole weight over her like a shield. I chose you 2 seasons back, Wade said, quieter now, his brow against hers. I've only been waiting on you to let yourself be chosen. Let yourself, Alina. I've got you, I have got you. The last of the ice went out of her, not from her hands, that would take hours. but from the deeper, older cold she had carried far longer than one night. She turned her frozen fingers inside his until she was gripping him back. "I stopped believing anyone would come," she whispered. "I'll come every time," he said. "Every time the rest of my life. That's my word, and you know what my word is worth." She did know, in this county it was worth everything, and now it was hers. "Then yes," Eleanor said, and it broke on a sob and a laugh at once. "Yes, Wade, whatever you're asking, yes." He made a rough sound and gathered her in, careful of her hands, and held her against him with the child sleeping warm at their side. And for a long while neither said anything more because nothing more needed saying. The fire cracked. The storm, having failed to take them, wore itself down toward morning. They came off the mountain at first light. The blizzard had blown itself to rags in the night, and the world it left was blinding white and dead still and new, the sun coming up hard and gold over a valley scrubbed clean. Wade walked out of the trees at the head of the cut with little Sarah Colton alive in his arms and Eleanor at his side, on her own feet now, leaning on him but walking, and half the town was strung across the snow below, come out at dawn to look for bodies. They found instead the schoolteacher, the one they had called too plain and too clever and too old, fit for nothing but chalk dust. The dried-up spinster no one had chosen, walking down out of a killing storm with the lost child saved, and the richest man in the county holding to her arm as though she were the most precious thing the mountain held. The Colton mother broke from the crowd screaming her daughter's name, and Wade set the girl gently into her arms, and the town made a sound Eleanor had never heard it make on her account, not a whisper, not a titter behind a glove. A cheer. It rose ragged and startled and then full-throated. Wade did not let go of Eleanor's arm. He turned in the middle of it before the whole gathered, gaping town, before Mrs. Prout with her hand at her mouth, before the school board men, before every soul who had spent a season eating her name, and he raised his voice for the first time, so that not one of them could pretend later they had not heard. "I'll wed this woman," Wade Calloway said, "as soon as the parson can be got. And any of you that spoke against her had best find kinder words fast, for she'll be my wife, and my name will be over hers, and I remember every mouth in this valley that moved." Into the enormous silence that followed, Eleanor watched the town of Cedar Hollow begin at last to choke on its own words. Chapter 10, The Town Eats Its Words. The reckoning did not wait for the wedding. It did not even wait for the snow to melt. Wade Calloway had ridden 3 days through hell with the whole of the plot in his head, and he was not a man to carry a thing that heavy and set it down gently. The morning after they came off the mountain, Eleanor asleep at last in Doc Whitmore's back room with her hands wrapped and salved, little Sarah Colton restored to her mother's arms, Wade walked into the mercantile where half the town had gathered to marvel and gossip, and he laid it all out on the counter like a man dealing cards face up. "There's a fellow named Tull," he said, "does odd work between here and Bitter Creek. Vivian Ashford paid him $2 to swear he saw Eleanor Hayes throw herself at Marcus Dean at the Harvest Social, paid him again to keep quiet. He's already told the sheriff the whole of it in front of witnesses because he'd rather talk to a lawman than to me." Wade let that sit. Marcus arranged the room. Vivian arranged the crowd. It was staged, start to finish, the way you'd stage a hanging. The mercantile had gone very still. Doc Whitmore, standing by the stove, cleared his throat. "I looked at the letters the board was passing round, the ones that were meant to prove she mocked your children in private." He set a folded paper on the counter beside Wade's word. "Miss Hayes writes a schoolteacher's hand, every letter drilled and even. That forgery leans backward and blots its eyes. A 10-year-old of hers could tell you they weren't the same hand. I said as much in September." Nobody wanted to hear a doctor on the subject of penmanship. "We're hearing it now," said Wade. The town heard it. There is a particular silence a town makes when it understands, all at once, that it has been made a fool of and made cruel in the bargain, and Cedar Hollow made that silence in full. It was the sound of a great many people discovering they had cheered for the wrong thing and jeered at the right one. Mrs. Prout, who had led the whispering for 9 years, who had christened Eleanor a dried-up spinster fit only for chalk dust, opened her mouth. Whatever she had meant to say, some soft retreat, some asterisk, well, I never fully believed it myself, died on her tongue when Wade turned and looked at her. "You said it first and you said it loudest," Wade told her, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. "I remember, she remembers, you'll want to be about mending that." Mrs. Prout shut her mouth. For the first time in living memory, she found nothing at all to say. Vivian Ashford's beauty had bought her a great deal in Cedar Hollow, first place at every social, the deference of shopkeepers, the certainty that a rich man would one day be hers by right of her own face. It bought her nothing now. When the truth was out and the sheriff came to the Ashford house, Vivian tried the only currency she had ever needed. She was radiant with tears, she was tragic, she was misunderstood. She had only meant to protect Wade, she said, from a scheming older woman who had trapped him. Surely anyone could see that. Surely a man like Wade. A man like me? Wade said from the doorway, and she turned to him with her whole beautiful face lit up in hope, and he watched it die as he went on. Walked into a blizzard and found the woman you tried to ruin lying in the snow with a child under her body, giving that child her own coat off her back. That's the woman you called scheming. You'll not speak her name to me again. He put on his hat and left. It was, everyone agreed later, the coldest thing the county had ever seen Wade Calloway do, and the most deserved. Vivian left Cedar Hollow within the month. She went to her aunt's people in the city, where the story had not yet arrived, to find a place where her face was still worth what she thought it was. No one saw her off. Marcus Dean fared no better. He had wanted Aliner's post for his cousin, and his own standing in the town, and he had built his whole play on the town believing him a fine, blessed, upstanding sort of man. That belief was gone by noon. The school board, which had been so ready to review Miss Hayes's asterisk conduct, discovered a sudden and pressing interest in Mr. Dean's. He resigned his committee seat before they could take it from him, packed his good coats, and took the same road out that Vivian had taken, though not mercifully in the same coach. "He wanted my job," Aliner said, when Wade told her, her bandaged hands folded in her lap and something dry and glinting coming back into her eyes at last. In the end, he couldn't even keep his own. No, Wade agreed. He couldn't. The school board came to her, hats literally in their hands. They came to Doc Whitmore's back room, 3 grave men who had let a season of lies stack up against a woman who had given 9 years to their children, and they stood at the foot of her bed and could not, at first, look at her directly. Then the oldest of them, a rancher named Colton, Sarah's own grandfather, did look at her, and his weathered face worked, and he said, "Miss Hayes, there's no words fit for what we let happen. We took a liar's paper over your face and your 9 good years, and you went out in that storm anyhow after our own when grown men stood in the road afraid." He turned his hat in his hands. "We'd be honored past speaking if you'd keep the school. We've voted it. Your post and a raise to it, and the roof mended proper this time. And our apology entered in the town book so it's written down where a body can read it 100 years on." Aliner was quiet a long moment. She had imagined this scene in the bad nights, imagined the town crawling, imagined how it would taste. It did not taste as she had thought. There was no triumph in it. There was only 3 tired old men who had been wrong, and a job she loved, and the children. "I'll keep the school," she said, "for the children. Not for the board." A pause, and then, because she was Aliner Hayes and could not entirely help herself. "And you'll mend that roof before the spring rains, Mr. Colton, or I'll teach every child in Cedar Hollow exactly whose fault the leak was." Colton laughed, a startled, grateful, watery laugh, and the thing between them was, if not healed, at least honestly begun. The parents came too, all that week, singly and in pairs, to the back room and then to the schoolhouse when she was well enough to stand at the front of it again. They brought bread and preserves and shy children clutching fistfuls of dried flowers. Little Sarah Colton came clutching nothing, only ran the length of the room and flung both arms around Aliner's skirts and would not let go, and Aliner knelt, carefully, her hands still tender, and held the child she had carried down a mountain, and found she could not speak at all. "You found the hollow tree," Sarah whispered into her collar. "The one from the lesson. I knew you'd know. I told myself Miss Hazel know where I went, and then you came." "I'll always know where you are," Aliner said when she could. "All of you, that's the whole of my job." They were married in the little white church 3 weeks later, on a bright cold morning with the last of the snow still bright in the gullies, and the whole of Cedar Hollow came. They came because it was the wedding of the county's most respected man, yes. But they came, more than that, because they had all of them a debt to pay that could not be paid in coin. The debt a town owes a woman it wronged and who walked into a killing storm for its children anyway. They came to be part of the mending. Mrs. Prout came and sat near the back and cried, and it was not entirely for show. She had, in her clumsy way, spent the 3 weeks mending, bringing over a wedding quilt she'd stitched herself, saying little, which for Mrs. Prout was a form of prayer. Alina wore a dress of deep blue that Wade had sent all the way to the city for, and she did not look young in it, and she did not try to. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman of 32 who had waited a long time and chosen, at last, to be chosen. She looked, several people remarked, and none of them meant it unkindly now, radiant. The young women who had once held court and named her Pastor Bloom watched from the pews as she came up the aisle on Doc Whitmore's arm, and watched the way Wade Calloway looked at her when she reached the front, the way the iron-worded, unhurried, unbending richest man in the county looked at the plain, clever schoolteacher, as though the doors of his whole guarded life had finally been thrown open, and not one of them that morning thought her too old for anything. The parson said his words. Wade said his clear and steady, so the whole church heard the great man give his sovereign word away. And then, before he kissed her, Wade Calloway bent his head close, the way he had in the line shack with the storm at the door, and he said the last of it low, only for her, the way the truest things are always said. "There's my name over you now," he whispered. "For good, let the whole world try to touch you," his voice roughened. "I told you I'd come every time, Alina. Here I am, first of all the times." "First of all the times," she whispered back, and this time there was no ice left anywhere in her at all. At golden hour, the wedding done and the town gone home, Wade brought her out to the ranch that would be hers now, the wide land, the herd dark against the snow, the low house with its lamps just lit. He handed her down from the wagon himself and did not let go of her hand. Alina stood in the last gold light of the day on the porch of her own home, a wife, chosen, safe, and looked out over the valley that had called her too plain and too clever and too old to wed, and found she carried none of it anymore. The words the town had spent on her had all come back to it. She had watched it eat every one. Wade came and stood behind her and put his arms around her, his chin at her hair, and they watched the light go down together. "No regrets," he said, not quite a question. "None," Alina said, "not one in all my life from this day back." She leaned into him, into the warmth and the weight and the certainty of him, into the plain, astonishing fact of being wanted. "I stopped believing anyone would come." "I know," he said, and his arms tightened, and his words settled over her like a roof, like a shield, like a home. "But I came, and I'm not going anywhere, that's my word." And it was, in that valley, worth everything, and it was hers.